The next session promises good entertainment and valuable information. There are many ways to learn about new cultures, learn about new countries. You can study statistics, you can compare GDP per capita, the child mortality, or the number of refrigerators per 100,000 inhabitants. That's one end of the scale. The other end is to listen to interesting personalities who crossed the bridge and came from one country and settled in another. A guy who came from a small town in Denmark and settled in Beijing, or a girl who came from China and settled in France, and so on. How were their expressions? How were their impressions? What did they experience? What did they find scary? What can we learn from listening to their stories? We have 5 personalities from the travel industry. They will tell us what they think about moving to another country, Chinese in Europe and Europeans and Americans in China. This format can be very interesting, it can be very entertaining, but it's also a bit risky. It takes a very good, experienced moderator to manage such a session. And I'm very happy that Professor Lipman, Geoffrey, accepted the challenge to run this session. Professor Lipman is not only a guy who has spent a lot of years in the travel industry in top positions, he's an experienced moderator and he's a very good speaker. Moderator, when you meet Geoffrey in the halls of this Expo, you can ask him about Kinshasa. He will tell you an interesting story. Not only is a very experienced personality in moderating, he is also a very warm personality who is good at listening to other people and bringing the best of these personalities forward. And he is last but not least also so much executive that if things start to drift off, he can pull the harness and get things back on track again. Geoffrey, with these words, I give you the word, please.
Thank you very much, Jan. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're delighted to have you with us for this session. It's going to be an interactive session. As Jan said, I'm Geoff Lipman. I'm the president of SUNx Malta, which is a not-for-profit program as a legacy to Maurice Strong, with whom I had so many interactions in China, and who was the father of sustainable development. I first went to China in 1980 with the Director General of IATA. I was the executive director, and we spent time discussing with the Chinese airline its arrival into the international marketplace. And then in the 1990s, as president of the World Travel and Tourism Council, we worked very hard with the Chinese National Tourism Administration as they began to open up first the domestic market and then the international market. And latterly, in the first decade of this century, as Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations World Tourism Organization, we had many interactions with the Chinese government at the highest level as they became one of the leading travel and tourism destinations and origin markets in the world. In those latter periods, I worked with Maurice Strong, who had a company in China, Cosmos, and we spent an enormous amount of time together, particularly in Beijing, and I have only the warmest and most positive feelings about China's emergence as a global superpower. So with that introduction, we have, as Jan said, 5 very experienced and very well qualified panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves first of all, and then we're going to have 2 rounds of questions and answers. The first round is going to focus on the things that they've found the best in their experiences in the places they live, and then the things that they've had the most challenges with. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a sort of last round, quick fire round, in which they'll give their advice to people who might be trying to do business in a similar way that they themselves have been doing business over the years. So that's the format. I'm going to first turn to Ping Ping and ask you if you start off this round of introduction, tell us who you are and tell us what you've been doing.
Thank you, BUZZ.travel. Thank you, Yan and Geoffrey, for this nice introduction. I'm Ping Ping, which means good luck in Chinese. Actually, I'm based in Nice. It's been like 20 years. Wow, that I arrived in France, has this living experience abroad. Nowadays, my focus is for the intercultural business training. That my main purpose to create this business is because I really believe that understanding ourselves and understanding others is the key to business. And today we are talking more and more about creating unique traveling tourist experiences. How to create that unique experiences, we need to understand each other better. So that's why I created Asia Biz Class. The main focus is to focus on each culture point, really help both sides. I mean, from the European side to understand better about the Asian side, from the Asian side to better understanding about the European side. That's what I believe that the success of the future business will put their focus on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ping Ping. That's a great introduction. And now I'll ask my friend Jim Spear about his experiences and the amazing things that he's been doing in his work in China. Jim?
Well, hi, everybody. I'm very delighted to be a part of the program today. My name is Jim Spear. I'm from the United States. I've lived here in China since January of 1986 and been in the tourism business since 2005 when I retired to our country house at Mutianyu Village near the Great Wall, and we started some sustainable tourism businesses. We leased a abandoned village schoolhouse and started a restaurant and an arts center, and then also a lodging business, which today has the Brickyard Hotel, which is named the very first countryside heritage hotel in China. What our business has been about is sustainability in multiple dimensions. And the most important one for us has been social sustainability. Villages all over the world are under attack. They are hard to sustain into the next generation. City people come and take over, outsiders come and make big investments, and the local people get left behind. So our business has been aimed at hiring local people and working with other local businesses and contractors in order, as Ping Ping said, to provide a unique experience for our visitors. And it's unique not just for foreigners who come to see the Great Wall, but also for Chinese who come to get a slice of life in the village and see what traditional Chinese life was about. And I'm a double foreigner because I'm not only an outsider in a small insular village, I'm a foreigner. And for me, it's been a wonderful and exciting challenge. I've had a house here for 25 years, and it's home. It's home, and I love to share it with people who come to visit. And I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And you left out perhaps the most important part, that you have a Chinese wife and Chinese family. So you're not just taking part in the village life, but you've become part of the social fabric of the country. I would now like
Jeff,
to ask. Sorry,
Jeff, I'm just sorry. You know, my wife is my real boss. And she started off as my Chinese tutor at Berkeley more than 40 years ago. And I've been paying her the tuition fee ever since. And the only bad thing is that she's a great teacher and I'm not such a good student. So thank you.
Well, all I can say as a friend for many years, you're a very happy man and you're a very lucky man. I'll now ask Jing, my old colleague from UNWTO, smartest guy in UNWTO, if he'd like to tell us about his experiences.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and hi everyone. As Geoffrey just mentioned, my name is Jing, and I came to. I'm now based in Madrid. This is the place where, when I came in the year 1992, when I joined the World Tourism Organization. At that time, it was called WTO, and now it's called UNWTO. And ever since then, I've been living in Madrid, in Spain, and most of my years I've been working in the Asia department of UNWTO. And now that I retired at the beginning of this year. And simple as that. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to join the panel.
Always simple, but always very, very clear. Anders, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. My name is Anders Ellemann Kristensen, and I've been in Beijing since 2006, and I've been in China since 2003, where I came on a state scholarship to study Chinese. I've been in the tourism industry here ever since I started at school, because I had a summer job doing what we call the long run, which is the trip from Beijing to New Delhi, over the plateau and up the hill and down the hill again, if you can say, when we enter into Tibet. I've been running Albatros expeditions and Albatros travel since 2010. We've been specialized in adventure travel to the polar regions. We are building ships here in China now. And I am 41 years old, and I have been in Beijing, since 2010, as I said. So I've been here for quite a while.
Thank you very much, Anders. We'll come back to you in the second round, and then we'll finish this first round with Adam Wu. Adam?
Thank you, Geoffrey, and thank you for BUZZ.travel for organizing this actually very interesting session already here, because it's from the introduction of the colleagues, we already realize that the world is really a small world, because I happen to have very similar experience, starting with 1986, when I was sent overseas, also as a government scholar. So quite a long time, like Jim came to China. So maybe we swapped. So I was sent overseas. And ever since then, I've been initially trained for diplomatic careers, but of course go on to the business field. And we came to the the tourism field in 2005. Before that, we were already doing a lot of government officials, business people traveling, but officially we launched the World Travel Online, the first outbound travel portal in China, helping foreign destinations, foreign businesses to promote them in China. Literally, we had clients from, I would say starts with Buckingham Palace to British Museum, or Argentina to America. And what's also bring the similarity to some colleagues is we focus on outbound travel from China by taking Chinese overseas. So that's why we have a slogan of take the world to China, but bring the world to China and take Chinese to the world. And that's our focus by helping many Chinese, both government officials, business people, and of course leisure travelers, even students in the early days, to travel overseas, because we started with collaboration with China Pages. That was the brainchild of Jack Ma before he launched Alibaba. And indeed, when we launched the World Travel Online, I also met Jack Ma in person when he visited the UK. We were on the way back to China. So he was working on this idea, but he wanted to have something more competing against C-Trip. But I said, well, we would love to have more information-based on providing Chinese visitors about foreign destinations. And of course, that also evolved to having the CBN Travel Miles in the UK, where I also have home in China. So literally I've become more international in nature. So I'm living tourism, both inbound and outbound. So that's a bit about me. But of course, business-wise, we'll be glad to help any businesses, any destinations to venture into the Chinese market, even during the COVID-19, because we've been doing much online, both using Chinese social media, but also mini programs, and of course, Chinese websites never stops. And indeed, we launched the World Travel Online marketplace, like, virtual exhibition, so this is new trends where, I will be glad to share later on the personal experience of dealing with Chinese coming into the UK and Europe. Is that line
Thank
up?
you yeah, that was perfect, Adam. Thank you very much. And I have had the pleasure of spending quite a lot of time with you at various travel marts around the world. And you are undoubtedly one of the most knowledgeable people on what is the best way to get to the Chinese visitor, not the least also for telling visitors to China what are the best things to do and see and experience. So that's the first round, ladies and gentlemen. I think you can see we've got a really good cross-section of interests, of nationalities, of experiences. And this is going to take us now to the next round, and we're going to go back to Ping Ping, and we're going to ask Ping Ping, what, in all this experience that you've had, what are the standout good things, and what are the things that have given you the most challenges? Ping, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. I feel personally, I still remember the very first day when I arrived in France, that we were very kindly treated by our school. And I still remember that treatment in the restaurant. It was amazing because we can see that from the school side, they're putting their heart to treat me, because that's I can understand later by my living experience in France. Later, I realized what they offer is what they think is the best for us. But as a Chinese who just arrived, get on the plane, I can tell you that a meal is quite difficult for me. I will not go to the details about the entry, main course, and the dessert. And I remember after the first meal, I take that very famous espresso. And for the other 2 days, I didn't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
But now I can drink like espresso for like 5 cups a day without any problem. So this is for me, the challenge is what it's not. I don't call it a challenge. I think that's just the way how the different side people are living. So that's about the personal life. So we have these interactions with the friends, the context, the distance. I think the most challenging thing for me as a Chinese, if it's personal or professional, it's that
Ping Ping,
distance.
I'm not sure if you're coming through.
Yeah.
Ping Ping, when you arrived there, you were a child and you had to learn. You had to learn the language. How long did it take you before you became fluent in French?
That's a very good question. Actually, I learned Chinese in China as because I was studying there is a problem with my microphone, or can everybody hear me? Okay, good. I learned Chinese. I'm sorry. I learned English in Chinese for 4 years as my major in international business. And then I choose came to France because I think if I will have Geoffrey. Yeah, if I'm looking for
Yes, hello, I can hear you.
Yeah, if I'm looking for living experience abroad, since I have already learned English, why not take advantage of this opportunity and learning a new language? So actually, I arrived in France with speaking only 3 sentences, like bonjour, vous pouvez parler lentement, s'il vous plaît. So ever since then, I survived with this sentence for for years. I remember my first internship in ST Microelectronic because I was hired as an internship because we can speak English. It's a global group. But I remember during the coffee session, the chat session, people around me talking in French. I cannot understand a word at all. I couldn't. But then after 3 months of internship, when I back to school, I have that kind of feeling. People talk around me. I know, I can guess. So for the foreigners living abroad, I think every challenge starts from the communication, from the language. Sometimes we can speak very good level of the language, but since we know the communication, 80% is nonverbal, or it's how to say that, it's that connection. We can talk with perfect English, maybe we don't set up that connection. So that's why I'm in continuous study about how to connect with people, how to connect with clients, what we will bring the professionals together, how to connect with Chinese tourists, for example. So all this just to reply your question, that I actually learned my French in a very freestyle way with my friends during my internship and during my professional life in France. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ping Ping. And I have to say your English is perfect.
Thank you.
Jim, over to you.
Okay. Well, as a foreigner living in China, the thing that surprised me the most was how easy it was to start businesses here. China's been undergoing opening and reform for 40 years now, and I came at the right time to be able to start a small independent business in the tourism sector. And I've been really surprised at how much attention we got from government at all levels, and how much support that we've been provided. Not special deals, but just the ability to get attention and to get approvals and so forth. I think that our starting point, my wife and I, my wife is a US citizen at this point, and so we're both officially foreigners. Our starting point is it's a local business, and so we have to live as neighbors with the villages who surround us, and by the leaders of our township and our district and of Beijing. And we respect the people that we're working with. And I think that's really important as a foreigner coming to work anywhere in any country, is remembering that you're here at the decency of the people who are hosting you. You don't have a right to be here. You don't have a right to start a business. And so you need to pay attention that you don't come in and try to strong arm people. I think that, as in Ping Ping's experience, the language is really important. But perhaps having great fluency isn't as important as having the right kind of attitude. Like most things, this notion of being in China at the right time and opening and reform and living in a village with local people who've accepted us, it always cuts both ways. So on one level, the thing that's the hardest is the same thing as what's been the easiest.
Just to finish up, that rapid change has been probably the biggest challenge. And then being an outsider in a little village, I might as well have been in the south of France in a little village. I mean, outsiders are always hard to digest, but it's been very challenging. We've learned a lot, and we haven't gone bankrupt. We didn't go into our businesses to make a whole heck of a lot of money. We wanted to be able to survive, and we wanted to be able to pay our people decently and to follow the rules and the regulations and to be compliant. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you get to become a mega millionaire, but we've had a good time. And some of you in this conversation are much younger. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just say, Jim, I've had the pleasure of visiting you at the schoolhouse and the brickyard, and I have to say that the last point that you made, or the earlier point that you made about your integration into the village life, was to me one of the most impressive things that I saw. You're very much and also you're a designer. You have redesigned the old buildings in an absolutely incredibly simpatico and a brilliant way. And anybody who gets to Beijing, you really should go and visit Jim's place. It's phenomenal. Look, I'll now turn to Jing and tell us what it's been like for you, not just living in Madrid, but working in an international organization.
Well, thank you, Geoffrey. I think your question is very very relevant when this panel is discussing actually the two markets. On one hand, Europe, and on the other is China. For me, I'm not doing business, Geoffrey, but if I look at certain comfort zones based on my experiences of more than 20 years, we can also apply this in a business sense, in a way that as if we are in trade of commodities. What you need to look at as a key to success is things like complementarity. For me, the biggest comfort zone of Europe versus China is that we have a very high degree of complementarity in tourism terms. We have very different cultural heritage, we have very different historical monuments, and we have very different civilizations. This differences actually makes both Europe and China extremely attractive, both as a source market as well as a destination. It is actually this very complementarity that will actually make us continue to be comfortable even during the COVID recovery period. Because without that, people will not continue to travel to each other's places. But I see that this phenomenon of being complementary to each other will continue. And this makes us more confident in our recovery process, because the demand will continue to be there. It is pent up right now, but the demand will come up when it comes to the recovery. Although these two major markets, we're talking about not short haul, but long haul. So the long haul recovery probably will come as the second phase of the recovery process. So this is the first point, Geoffrey, that I wanted to share with you, that we need to be confident that the complementarity as part of the trade and services will continue to be there for both Europe and China. Second point, Geoffrey, that I wanted to share with you, because of this high degree of complementarity, we also have high degree of differences when receiving tourists from both ends. And due to this, there's a dire need, if we're talking about our version number 2 in the recovery for the penetration of each other's, there's a dire need for a better understanding of each other in terms of their cultures, the difference of the way of thinking, even the philosophy of being, how we treat each other as part of our hospitality industry. Because what the Europeans think are essential may not be exactly the same as the Chinese, and it is vice versa. Let me give you a few examples when it comes to the high degree of differences in cultural understanding in terms of tourism behavior, tourist behavior. When you go to a hotel and you do the check-in and you get off a taxi as a Chinese tourist coming to Europe, the first thing that you expect is some bellboy to pick up your luggage. Here in Europe, everything is individual. You do not expect that much of a reception. In China, if you are in a high market, in the upscale market, you immediately expect not only the bellboy, but also you need to have a chilled or hot towel to be offered to you as part of the warm reception. And then when you enter into a hotel room, a nice hot cup of tea is ready for you to take. It's nothing really anything material, but it's a sign of symbol. But for this, in Europe, it is not necessarily very, very essential. But in the case of the Chinese coming to Europe, they expect these kind of degree of warmth. It's not only about the degree of warmth, Geoffrey, but it's also about the way of thinking. Now, for even upmarket Chinese tour groups or individuals, when they come to Europe, they don't want to spend 3 hours at the dinner. The duration of a proper meal, even at a luxury restaurant, they would prefer to have 1 hour or even less, and then leave the rest for photo taking or even for shopping. Now, at the upscale market as well, while the Europeans probably would like to spend the first 30 minutes telling you what kind of bottle of a red wine that is, from which area that is, and which year. But the Chinese, even the rich Chinese, may not be interested in that, but rather they would spend on other things. So the understanding of each other's culture is essential in our version number 2 when it comes to penetrating further to the Chinese market. And
can I just say to you, by the way, it isn't only a China-Spanish cultural issue. As an Englishman originally working with you in Spain, I found the time of the dinners starting at 9 o'clock in the evening and going on till midnight, as you say, a little bit challenging compared to the sort of 6 o'clock in China, which you've just been defining. And I think this cross-cultural differences, habits, expectations is a really important piece of making people feel that you're looking after their needs and not shoehorning them into your needs in a way. Would you agree with that?
Exactly, Geoffrey. This is exactly the point that I wanted to make. Apart from the way of thinking and the cultural understanding, and then also the eating habits and the tourist behavior, there are also other elements that come into the play, such as nowadays in China, You don't need to use any, paper notes for purchasing. Everything is through the apps. But with the WeChat apps or with the Alibaba Pay, it doesn't work in most parts of Europe. So this is probably some of the uncomfortable zones that we need to look at it as part of the cultural understanding, Geoffrey. My last point to share with you is that probably in our next phase of dealing with the Chinese tourists, we need to look at the diversification of products, of tourism products. In the long past, most of the Chinese coming to Europe, they would go mainly for the sightseeing, the quick tours, and the multi-destination itineraries. But now in phase number 2, and especially with the virus crisis, what we need to look at is more slow-paced products, and also some of the untapped products that classic traditional European tourists would go, such as the coastal products, the beach tourism, and the sports-related activities. None of these are actually being explored by the Chinese. So there is a huge potential for the Chinese to look at products of Europe beyond the sightseeing ones. Thank you. I give the floor back to you, Geoffrey.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I'm going to go to Anders, but I just want to pick up one point that you made, and that is the changing post-COVID perceptions and requirements. I've been arguing for a long time, as you know, that we have to have a cleaner, greener kind of tourism. You talked about the slow pace. Do you perceive that there is a growing understanding amongst the Chinese visitors to Europe of something, I'll just call it the eco-tourism kind of world, rather than the city centre and the shopping kind of world? Or is it still very much in that urban interest?
I would say the urban interest tourists will continue, but to a lesser degree, Geoffrey, because the new normal, if you like, will no longer be the same after COVID-19, that people would go for more mountain resorts, people would go more to the places where more out in the open, and this is no exception for the Chinese tourists. And from that angle, greener tourism products, the more climate-friendly products will be more attractive to the Chinese as well.
Thank you. And just as an editorial comment, I'm personally delighted to see how China and President Xi are taking a sort of leading role on the world stage in terms of carbon reduction and climate responsiveness. I think the latest interjection in the UN Assembly of a quite significant increased reduction over the next 30 years is really a very material issue. Okay, I'll now turn to Anders. You have been experiencing eco-tourism kind of lifestyle, trekking over the Tibetan plateau. Anders, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I learned about China when I came here is that China is very different within China. So if you're Northern Chinese, you're Southern Chinese, you're from west of China, or you're from a big city, you are actually very, very different. And so China is always, sometimes in Western minds, one big thing, which is actually is not at all. One of the funniest experiences I had was we had a very nice Southern Chinese guy with us from Guangzhou who came up and said, 我有好几天没吃过饭. And I'm like, oh, and in Chinese it means I haven't eaten for days. And I'm like, what? Because we gave him everything. There was food on the ship and it was there. And then I asked his guy that was with him and he said, there hasn't been any rice. And he meant there wasn't any 米饭. But我们给他吃面. We have given him noodles. But he wanted rice because he doesn't eat noodles. and his wife said that she's from the northern part of China, that they have huge arguments in the beginning when they got married because she only gave him noodles and he hated it, but he couldn't tell her because he didn't want to get into a fight with her, but he only ate rice. And from that, I learned that Chinese are actually very different. So when we have guests from Guangzhou or from Hangzhou, they get a completely different service on the ship than when we have Northern Chinese. And I would like to say that the Chinese that we have actually dwell very long on one thing. We have photo trips, and we cannot drag them away from one specific point. They'll stay there for 12 hours and dedicate their lives to it. So maybe the meal they won't spend time, but they will actually be very upset if you bring them away from what they're taking pictures of. So I think it is more looking at who you sell your trip to, and be careful not to pull in always the Chinese European narrative. It can be very difficult. People here are extremely diverse. That's one of the things I learned. And each Chinese person is actually their own individual. And so that one can be a little tricky if you make general assumptions. So knowing your customer is always a good thing. Going back to how it is to be how to live in China. China is a place where you get to reinvent yourself. I have done everything from working at the embassy to working for the Danish national TV to doing travel to becoming a lobbyist with the European Union for the travel industry here in Beijing and in China in general. So you get to reinvent yourself in China, and the possibilities are endless. And it is a very friendly and a safe place to be. In that way, it reminds me of Denmark. And when it really works here, it is, as Scandinavian, I think socialism at its best combined with a very strong form of capitalism. When it is at its worst, as we will also talk about, I guess, is when rules, as Jim slightly touched on, become stiff and become impossible to overcome. One example is that the travel industry here in China is still closed up for fully invested foreign travel agencies, which is one of the things that I've been lobbying to change. So, and it hasn't done so. So in that way, we have probably, since I started out in China, things were easier in some ways because there were clearly rules and they were to be followed, but you had a dialogue often with the people who were in charge of the rules, and you could probably find a solution. What has happened, which is of course what happens when societies develop, things stiffen, which is good. Especially we've seen part of the campaign against corruption is that this small corruption that we, as foreigners, I've never met it, but we know it exists. But what they did was to digitalize tax paying. They digitalized a lot of interaction with the government, which was good because corruption then disappears. You can't, I guess you can't bribe a website. But the problem is that rules that were then didn't make any sense or weren't not really very, very, how to say, fair, actually started to become enforced and you couldn't get your way through it. So in that way, the system here has changed a little bit, or actually a lot. And I think in that way, when Jim said that we are guests here, I slightly probably, I know what he means. And I think he means that you have to behave. And I think we do. But I actually feel that I am here based on a set of rules. And that I think is one of the things that has to slowly change within China, that it has to become more rule-based. So being and living in China may not be something that you should be granted. It is something that is given by rules and law, as the government has said, like in Europe. And if you abide by the rules and laws, you are granted to stay here. And I think that's going to be exciting to follow in China, because China has now developed to a point where it will be more rule-based. But when you become rule-based, you also lose some of your flexibility. And so in that way, that is one of the things that I'm very excited to see here and how that will change. But of course, it is a fabulous place, and China has every single thing every day. If I'm bored, I just go into the streets here of Beijing and I see people's lives passing by, people starting all over a new life, or people who made fabulous wealth, filled with Rolls Royces, Lamborghinis, but also you see people who just came in from Gansu or Hebei, who are starting a completely new life and struggle. So you see every sense of life. So in that way, China is extremely alive. For Scandinavians, it reminds me of being sometimes in Southern Europe because there's so much life here. So that would kind of be my point of it.
Thank you very much, Anders. Listening to you reminded me of the words of a very wise old Chinese gentleman I met on my first visit in 1981. And he was the interpreter for the group that we were dealing with, although I kind of think that he was more than the interpreter. He had, maybe it was his age. He told me at the time, you must always remember two things about China, two numbers. The first number is 5,000, and the second number is 1 billion. And the 5,000 is how long we have been developed as a civilization. And the 1 billion in those days was how many mouths we have to feed every day to keep it all together. And these two numbers have always stuck in my mind about China. When you talk about the rules and whether they're hardening or not, I think it is important to remember that you have to deal with feeding 1.3, 1.4 billion people a day, every day now, in a world where the challenges to this, the natural challenges, the drought, the hurricanes, the climate-induced extremes of weather are making what was normal in 1981 completely abnormal. And of course, I won't even venture down the path of the political environment. So, you know, it's as an observer, there are evolving rules, but you need them in order to make your society evolve as well. And that takes me to the last of our panelists, and it's been fascinating to listen to these different views. And Adam, would you like to give us your thoughts now?
Yes, thank you, Geoffrey. I would like to start with a bit of Eastern Europe, because I know we are all, tend to be from Western Europe. I'm sitting in UK. I come to UK anyway, but I started with Eastern Europe, which is part of the European Union now. I don't want that to be left out because they are very keen on China as well. And my own experience is that the people in Eastern European countries, which I visited the entire European, every single country, started with Eastern European countries. They were actually, I would say, much more friendly to Chinese, at least that they were more fond of Chinese culture. I'll give you one example that when I started learning, I was in Poland, that's the language that obviously, I didn't know any word of that. But wherever I went, and the local people, they recognized it's Chinese, particular children would just, thinking I would know Kung Fu, for example. I traveled by train. That's very pretty Polish girl that even came to me and say, well, if I know Kung Fu, she wants to learn Kung Fu. I got scared. I said, why is the girl, come to me? I was too young at that time anyway. But then in school, when I was learning the language, the professor, who gave me the name Adam, by the way, that's so ever since then I'm Adam, my official name. But the professor, very similar to you, Geoffrey, is a very learned professor. And when he heard that myself and a couple of others were coming from China, he was really amazed. He said, wow, when your ancestors were making love in the silk quilt, we were still playing on trees. So I'm just comparing the long history you just mentioned. Yes, we had the 5,000 years history, but people in Eastern Europe at that time, at least, appreciated more kind of a Chinese culture. The same reflected by the fact that I met many of those from Eastern Europe visiting, for example, Forbidden City, where whenever I had other guests even took my children there. And then suddenly I hear they use the European languages. It gives me thinking that they like that. The culture is kind of a cultural attraction, I think, attracts both Chinese coming to Europe, but also Europeans going to China. Now, in comparison, in contrast to those experiences, when I came to the UK, I didn't learn English before because my first foreign language was Japanese. I was mistaken mostly for Japanese. Even in Italy, going to their store, that first of all, they came to me speaking Japanese. I happen to speak a bit Japanese anyway, but I'd have to correct them I'm Chinese, because at that time, very few Chinese ever traveled in the end of the 1980s, I think Jing would know, and early 1990s and so on. And even when I come to the UK, that when I asked my teacher how would I improve or learn English quickly, he said, if you really want my honest answer, is go to the pub. So, I didn't know what she meant. So when I went actually to the pub, I realized that when you get a bit, drunk, and you could actually constantly speak or listen to the others, there's no inhibition. So pub culture is something that's very British, and Chinese wouldn't understand it. So when we have had Chinese coming, we were invited by the host often say, well, let's go to the pub. Like what Xu Jing said earlier on, the Chinese would find, oh, we could have a quick meal, but why should we stay, on a pub for another, 2 or 3 or 4 hours? We wouldn't drink so much anyway. And that's, instead, they discovered something called casino. This is something that I know is not meant to be promoted. We never promote it, but they were drawn to it not because Chinese, as some, people think, foreign people think that Chinese like gambling. No, I tend to think that they have little to do in the evenings. Imagine when the Americans come to UK, they go to the, theaters because it's the same language. But, the Irish, they would go to the pub anyway. But the Chinese, what do? We don't know the language. So we finish dinner, around 6, 7 o'clock. We would never, have late dinner. That's our, kind of a habit. Then what do? We don't go to bed straight away, So then we, some of them would end up in casino where you don't have to know the language and just enjoy yourself. I think that's maybe a more kind of a logical explanation rather than they must gamble or something. And then shopping, of course. And this is what the British like the Chinese most. It's, again, when I came over, it was a time that the Japanese was still prevailing kind of visitors from East to UK. They were very, looked up on. But soon after, the Chinese came, and they still think that we were Japanese, but they discovered the difference because the Japanese would sneak around taking pictures from people's back gardens. That used to be in the press media and so on. They used to take out shoes before going to hotel rooms. And when we started having Chinese coming, the hotel, some general managers asked us, say, should we have a floor for the Chinese or whatever? I said, we would stay anywhere, seriously. I mean, for myself, speaking for myself, I would have thought, and the Chinese genuinely, we don't have to have a floor, but I did advise them on having, let's say, more hot breakfast, because most of our clients find having, the cold buffet is not the Chinese thing. But luckily, British have the, bacon or eggs and so on that at least is hot. But later on, they started offering porridge, thinking that Chinese like porridge. That's overdone because not all of us have porridge for breakfast anyway. So from that point of view,
Adam, I want you to bring this to an end if you don't mind, because the panel is coming to a close, and I want to give people time for one last minute of involvement. So if you could round up what you're going to say now, and then I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes.
Sure. What I would like to say is, having lived in European countries, not just Eastern Europe. I lived in France as well, and UK now. I would say that for Chinese, we wouldn't find difficult to immerse here. They are quite accommodating, but we need to bear in mind the difference and so on. That something we can never change, something they probably have stereotype of us. So that's the thing. I would think that it's my own experience, but never, detached from China, because that is the market. You rightly said we got 1 billion people, but 1.4 billion now. So essentially for business-wise, especially travel, China would still remain the largest outbound market. And that's what I would like to conclude is being Chinese, having Chinese origin, and colleagues speaking from Western point of view, that's the same. I think anything we do with China would be leading to the near and the longer future. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just, before turning to the final session, just tell you one story of my own experience, which underscores the last point that you made. I guess early, maybe 2004, 2005, I had the privilege when I was working at UNWTO of opening China's National Tourism Day. And I shared a press conference with the then chairman of CNTA, the China National Tourism Administration. And he made a very strong point at a time when the economy was a little bit dodgy worldwide. He made the point, he said, we are going to continue to encourage Chinese travelers to visit to our neighbors. And he said this publicly with the media there. He said, we know that from an economic perspective, that actually amounts to an import when Chinese travelers go and spend money abroad. But we think that that's part of our interrelationship with our neighbors. When they need exports, our travelers provide those exports, and we are not going to be inward looking. We're going to be very outward looking. And it's why I'm so optimistic about China's role on the world stage, because it has, certainly in the past 20 years, adopted a very collegiate approach to the way that it's expanded its tourism. And I think that's a very positive sign for the future. So last round, 5 minutes, you have 1 minute each. If you were giving advice to somebody going through the experience that you went through in 2 sentences, what would that advice be? Starting with you, Ping Ping.
This is a hard question for me because my habit is that I never take any position to give advice. I'm sharing my experience because everybody can take that experience in his own way, to his own level of sharing. So I would say,
make an exception.
Based on my
give some advice now. Yes, give some advice now. You have 30 seconds.
So if you want, for example, this one. We've been working with the Chamber of Commerce, local Chamber of Commerce in Nice, because everybody knows it's important to catch the Chinese tourists' attention, to satisfy their expectation, and to be better adapted to what they are looking for. So we are in continuous studying and researching about how to connect with Chinese tourists, and this connection can vary. Am I allowed to give an advice?
You have 10 seconds.
Never take anything as granted, because the customers evaluate. 10 years ago, Chinese tourists behave differently. And today, Chinese tourists is like 50% are full individual travelers. They are ready to take time to enjoy like what we call French art of living. I hope I'm still on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Listen to your customers. Your customers' needs and habits are changing. And in that respect, Chinese customers are no different from anybody else. Jim, your advice.
Well, first of all, don't try to change China. That will lead you to madness. Remember, you're a guest here and come here to learn and to grow with the country. The second piece of advice that I would offer is keep an open mind. And as soon as you think you start understanding China, that you know all about China, pack your bags and go home.
Okay, Jim, I think that's good. That's very sound advice. Don't underestimate China. Don't think you can change China. Jing.
Well, Geoffrey, once again, I'm not a businessman, so any advice will be more of a general nature. But perhaps I would like to leave to the audience for this panel session.
Don't think you're an expert.
That we must be conscious of what we are talking about. These two markets, Europe on one hand and China on the other, form the most significant markets of the world tourism. Europe takes roughly 48% of the tourism arrivals of the world. On China's side, every 10 tourists coming out of their national borders, one of them is Chinese. So let's be conscious about it, nurture it well, and continue to nurture it well. Then we will come out with a better world. Thank you.
Always so wise, my friend.
Thank you.
Is it end up being me? Yes. My advice would be to be patient and then to stick to your beliefs. So that is, if you are selling to Chinese people, remember that they are not looking for a Chinese complete product experience. They still want the foreign experience. So be patient when you enter here, but don't forget why you came in the first place, because especially when you do outbound tourism, they don't want to see what they can get in China. They want something unique that they can't find here.
Thank you, Anders. Excellent and perfect timing. And Adam, you have the last word for this panel. You have a minute.
Okay, so I would say be accommodating and believe we are all human, race. That we have very similar, we have a lot of similarities, but we also have different culture and history. So for those destinations that try to attract the Chinese, I would say just highlight your history and culture. That's what Chinese like the most, like what they would come to the UK for Shakespeare, for the royal families, that regardless if we don't have emperors anymore, but they still respect the royal family and so on. It's a history, it's a culture, but no politics. So we were grateful to Xu Jing's advice earlier on, no talk about politics, because if politics are on the table, no one wants to visit anyone, but we all want to learn from each other. I think if we always think about our culture and history, we will, respect each other better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to wrap up this session. I'd like to thank our 5 excellent panelists, a wonderful array of opinions and views and advice. And I'll close this panel by finally handing it back to you, Zhan, and thanking BUZZ.travel for giving us all the opportunity to participate in this fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoffrey.
Thank
you,
you.
Geoffrey. This format turned out to be very successful. It was a great way to get a lot of insights, to have a good entertainment as well. A good way to get a handle on the other side, get a feel for how the other side works. I think one takeaway, though, is that the difference between China and Europe is perhaps not as big as we sometimes think it is. There are also differences, as Anders told us, between northern China and eastern and western China, like there is between a Dane in Europe and a guy from Portugal. So perhaps it is much more about a person and about the person's attitudes to the place he is living and working in. Thank you so much. Great to see you guys, and we go on with the show. Thank you.